All right. Hopefully you can see me. Hopefully you can hear me too. It's a little noisy. I got like a makeshift um, camera set up right now because I forgot my little camera thing that mounts up my phone. But what's going on? What's going on, beautiful people? I hope you're doing well out in nature today, enjoying the good old outdoors because the outdoors be good sometimes when it's not super bug infested or really crowded with people or children running around or chasing rabbits. I think they're chasing rabbits. Anyways, we are continuing reading with Jam. I do not know. I'll be losing track. I should probably check before I start. I think I'm on part 5 of reading Real Artists Don't Starve by Jeff Goins. But this might be like episode 9 of Reading with Jam. Um, Thank you again for those who tune in. Thank you again for those who like it and share it. And, give me feedback. Let me know what stories or things that you would like for me to read. I'm usually sticking with nonfiction because I don't think I'm that good at character voices. And also, I'm already reading this nonfiction, like self-help kind of stuff, because I need help. I do, but I want to continue to develop myself, and I figured why not share some stuff that's helping me to develop, along with those who watch. So why not impact people? Try to be prolific, but at the same time impactful. So yes, yes, yes. All right, let's get into it. We are continuing to read Real Artists Don't Starve by Jeff Goins. I missed yesterday because I was in the midst of traveling, and by the time I was settled and stuff, it was like after midnight. So yeah, but yeah, let's get into it. We are on chapter 4. Chapter 4 of Real Artists Don't Starve. So please excuse any ambient sounds. It comes with nature. It comes with being outside and stuff like that. All right. Real Artists Don't Starve by Jeff Goins. Chapter 4. Harness Your Stubbornness. The starving artist is stubborn about everything. The thriving artist is stubborn about the right things. We are stubborn on vision. We are flexible on details. Jeff Bezos. As a young man, F. Scott Fitzgerald resisted the temptation to marry early in life because of his determination to become a great writer. Despite his reluctance, however, he fell in love with a young woman while he was stationed as a soldier in Montgomery, Alabama in 1918. The youngest of 6 children from a prominent Southern family, Zelda Sire, I think that's right. Zelda Sire was also reluctant to marry an unpublished writer whose career prospects were uncertain. A month after meeting her, Fitzgerald received a rejection letter from a publisher for a book manuscript he had submitted, encouraging him to revise the work and submit again. He and Zelda began writing letters to each other, but she continued to see other men. After the war ended and Fitzgerald was discharged from the military, he moved to Manhattan, eager to prove himself both as a suitor and writer. After being turned down for a position at a newspaper, he went to work at the advertising agency Baron Collier, where he composed trolley car advertisements for $35 a week. He never gave up his dream of being a writer, however, spending most nights writing stories, poems, and jokes, whatever might earn some money. Zelda remained unimpressed by his lack of success, which only seemed to further drive him toward it. Hey, that'll happen. During that time, Fitzgerald acquired an important trait. It was something that would go hand in hand with being a writer, one we often overlook in the pursuit of creative work today. In the spring of 1919, the writer put this resource to great use, writing 19 stories and receiving 122 rejection slips. He accumulated so many letters of refusal that the walls of his rented room were covered with them. The rejection did not dissuade him, though. It spurred him on. He had a secret weapon all artists possess: stubbornness. For the young writer, this was a season of failure and disappointment, but his stout refusal to quit helped him endure. He just would not give up, not on love and not on writing. When Fitzgerald wrote to Zelda informing her that his first novel, This Side of Paradise, which is a good book, had been accepted by Scribner's, She finally agreed to marry him. Makes sense, you know. If he ain't got no money, it makes sense. If you don't have money, it's really hard to try to get a woman to marry you. The wedding took place a week after the novel's publication. For the next 4 years, the author made stubbornness his ally, publishing another novel and numerous short stories to literary acclaim and commercial success. The same quality that had helped him win over his wife had made him one of America's preeminent young writers, earning the modern equivalent of $2,000 per short story and $500,000 a year. Stubbornness, it seems, served Fitzgerald well. In 1923, when he began writing his third novel, the author could not have been more confident about his new project. Artistically, he wrote in a letter to his editor, Max Perkins, it's head and shoulders over everything I've done. The more he worked, though, the more self-conscious he grew. Of his stories, he told a friend, they grow worse and worse. He turned inward and obsessed over every detail of his work, which began to erode his confidence. As the new novel approached publication, Fitzgerald grew nervous. The Great Gatsby is weak, he said of the title, casting his vote instead for On the Road to West Egg, or The High-Bouncing Lover. He worried the book wouldn't appeal to women, that the reviews would be bad, and that it wouldn't sell well enough to pay the publisher back his advance. As Fitzgerald expected, almost all these fears came true. The Great Gatsby was published on April 10, 1925, with one New York paper headlining its review. F. Scott Fitzgerald's latest, a dud. The rest of the literary world was equally critical, with H. L. Mencken calling it no more than a glorified anecdote, and referring to the author as this clown. A bit more bluntly, Ruth Snyder wrote, we are quite convinced after reading The Great Gatsby that Mr. Fitzgerald is not one of the great American writers of today. Gatsby did not achieve the success its author had hoped for, selling fewer than half as many copies as any of his previous novels. The failure crushed him. Afterward, the author found it even more difficult to write. His personal life fell apart too, when he admitted Zelda to a mental hospital in 1936 and was left to provide for their daughter on his own. Never fully recovering from the disappointment of his failure, he moved to Hollywood to write screenplays, a decision he later regretted. He struggled with alcoholism for most of his adult life and died of a heart attack in 1940 at the age of 44. At the time of Fitzgerald's death, The Great Gatsby was practically out of print and nowhere to be found in bookstores. His last royalty check was for $13, most of which was from copies the author had purchased himself. A once promising novelist ended his career doing what he considered hack work and went to the grave thinking himself a failure. Strategic stubbornness. We all need the ability to persevere and maintain passion for long-term goals despite adverse circumstances, or what Angela Duckworth calls grit. In a popular research paper, Duckworth wrote that grit entails working strenuously toward challenges, maintaining effort and interest over years despite failure, adversity, and plateaus in progress. The gritty individual approaches achievement as a marathon. His or her advantage is stamina, whereas disappointment or boredom signals to others that it is time to change trajectory and cut losses. The gritty individual stays the course. The story of F. Scott Fitzgerald is a sad one, but did it have to be? Per Duckworth's definition, what the man seemed to lack at the end of his life was grit. Perhaps blinded by his own success or distracted by details, the young writer was unprepared for the rejection that would soon follow. Lacking the perseverance to push through the inevitable plateaus of a literary career, a failure practically destroyed him. He was stubborn in the wrong things, losing the initial grit that had allowed him to persevere through early rejection. He forgot the big picture, which is that an artist's job is not to be perfect, but to be creating. This is a common pitfall among creatives, especially those of us working on what we believe to be our magnum opus. The work consumes us, leading to an unhealthy focus on the small things. When Fitzgerald published The Great Gatsby, he had high hopes for his novel. Because of these expectations, he fixated on the details, and when it flopped, he was devastated. We need something to protect us against such disappointments, a way to steel ourselves against the inevitable critique of our work. The way we do this is not just by being stubborn about anything and everything, but through strategic stubbornness. We must not only use our stubbornness to succeed, we must harness it and apply it toward the right things, turning it into tenacity. Otherwise, what helps us succeed can also be the source of our undoing. We may find ourselves missing the big picture. Pick up. We may find ourselves missing the big picture. The truth is, F. Scott Fitzgerald didn't have to consider himself a failure. He wasn't. With two successfully published novels, he was one of the best paid writers of his time, and his work had inspired others who would go on to great fame and fortune, including Ernest Hemingway. As tragic a figure as he may be, what made Fitzgerald great was not his tragedy, but his stubbornness. He did his best work when tapping into the tenacity that made him face the blank page after countless rejections. But when the barbs of critics wounded him, that same stubbornness worked against him, leading to an early end to his career. Grit may not have been able to save Fitzgerald's life, but it could have kept him creating. Stubborn, but flexible. In 1994, a 30-year-old Princeton graduate and Wall Street success story made a bold career change after coming across a startling statistic. A new network called the World Wide Web was growing at 2,300% per year. Did it mean anything? Many were shrugging, but the relatively young Jeff Bezos saw an opportunity. Within 48 hours of reading that statistic, he was on his way to creating what would become Amazon.com. The idea of Amazon wasn't well received at first. "What's the internet?" his father asked. Back in 1994, there was no way to know if the venture would be profitable or just a peculiar outlet for a soon-to-be starving artist. But Jeff started the company with a motto that defines its operations today. We are stubborn on vision. We are flexible on details. For a business-minded creative, this means being ferociously entrepreneurial, even within a corporate environment. The company's 150,000 employees approach their jobs according to Amazon's 14 leadership principles that grant them ownership of and responsibility for innovation and creativity. As a group, they have embraced Jeff's ethos that an entrepreneur must get comfortable with being misunderstood, which must be a great comfort every time they try something new. Amazon has also failed miserably at times. They spent millions on a 16-month television advertising campaign that demonstrated dismal returns on investment. They tried online auctions and couldn't hold their own against eBay. Some would even call Amazon Prime a failure because it doesn't recoup its costs. But Bezos reframes that as a marketing expense. In the end, failures at Amazon are just details. Bezos would say, and they're flexible on those. Pick up. In the end, failures at Amazon are just details, Bezos would say, and they're flexible on those. If you think that's a big failure, he once said of the Fire Phone, we're working on much bigger failures right now, and I am not kidding. Every single important thing that we have done has taken a lot of risk-taking, perseverance, guts, and some of them have worked out. Most of them have not. When he was 18, Bezos was quoted as saying he wanted to build hotels, amusement parks, and colonies for 2 million people, all in outer space. Turns out, he's always been interested in space travel. He didn't know how to get there, only that it would take a creative mind to figure it out. He had vision, but the details were still unclear. When Amazon made him the 5th richest man in the world, the stubborn entrepreneur found a way and quietly began building Blue Origin in the background of his everyday responsibilities. The aerospace company was launched with the Latin motto, Gradatim Ferociter, which describes not only how we might end up leaving the planet one day, but also how we can all succeed as artists in the meantime, step by step, ferociously. As an entrepreneur, Bezos is no stranger to criticism. He understands that it comes to almost all of us, as do hardship and failure. These are the guarantees of creative work. But what we do when those trials come determines our success far more than any circumstance. Starving artists tend to be stubborn about all things. Imagine them slaving away in studios, pumping out piece after piece, growing angrier each time something doesn't succeed. We say the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over, but expecting different results. And that's the starving artist. Mental, and that's the starving artist mentality embodied. Stubborn to a fault. Thriving artists, however, are flexible on details, but stubborn on vision. They do not take personally praises or criticism. They persevere so that they can keep doing their work, realizing success is not up to them. Their job is to continue creating. And if we want to follow in their footsteps, we must do the same, careful to not fixate on the details and harness our strategic stubbornness. Say yes. At the age of 24, Zach Burkhardt was working at a record label just outside of Nashville, Tennessee. In high school, he moved with his family from Pensacola, Florida, to Tennessee and stayed in the area to study music business at Middle Tennessee State University. He completed college by taking night classes and selling calendars at a mall kiosk during the day. In 2005, while still in school, he got a job working in the music business, which had been his dream. However, it turned out to be a nightmare. The work was mostly administrative, not creative as he had hoped, and soon he was unhappy with his job, wondering if there was something better waiting for him. One day in September 2010, Zach opened a mass email from his favorite author, who was struggling to turn his best-selling spiritual memoir into a feature film. In the email, the author, Donald Miller, said the project was running out of money and on the verge of failure. An investor had pulled out, and if he couldn't come up with additional funding, Miller would have to pull the plug on the film adaptation of Blue Like Jazz. Staring at the computer screen in front of him and feeling stuck in his dead-end job, Zach decided to do something about his situation. He called a friend, and together they came up with an idea to do a Kickstarter fundraiser to raise the extra $100,000 needed to finish the film. They were going to do it in a month, and all they needed was the approval of a New York Times bestselling author. They emailed Miller with their proposal. They would create a website, run a social media campaign, and create collateral to promote the campaign, which they called Save Blue Like Jazz. Within a couple of hours, the author had responded, asking for more information. That night, Zach read the email, but was too nervous to respond. He tossed and turned for the better part of an hour before finally turning to his wife, Tracy, to tell her his mind just wouldn't stop racing. She said, I think you need to go to work on this now. Everything sensible was telling Zach to go to bed, but something in him just wouldn't let it go. Just before midnight, he and his friend met for a late-night session of whiteboarding, strategizing, and planning. They put it all together in a proposal letter they emailed to Donald Miller just a few minutes before sunrise. The email included everything they would do to try to save the film project and how they would do it. They had never done anything like this, never worked with best-selling authors or large-scale crowdfunding campaigns. And here they were, laying it all out. It seemed like a long shot, but it was just the kind of stubbornness that another artist might admire. Until this point, the most successful crowdfunding campaign had raised approximately $80,000, and their plan was to break that record, without having any experience whatsoever. It was stubborn work, based on the belief that they could do this despite all the odds, but it was also the kind of outlet Zach had been craving for some time. He didn't think much about that at 5 o'clock in the morning when he put the finishing touches on their plan and sent off the email. He took a quick nap, then showered and went to work, a strange sense of invigoration following him for the rest of the day. Before the end of the day, Zach received a reply from Miller saying he was in. And just like that, the campaign was born. In the next 30 days, Zach and his friend would work harder than they'd ever worked before. What they lacked in experience, they made up for in tenacity, working early mornings, nights, and weekends. Whenever they weren't at their full-time jobs, they spent their time blogging and posting on social media about the campaign. They also did media interviews and answered emails from all over the world. It felt like a presidential campaign, Zach recalled. All that hard work paid off with 4,495 financial backers, pledging $345,992, helping to bring the project to life. We broke all the records that day, Zach said. Biggest project on biggest project on Kickstarter. Highest crowd-funded movie. Project of the year. Soon after the success of the campaign, Zach was offered another job on the set of the film. The director asked him to take behind-the-scenes photos of the movie-making process for the fans who had helped fund the picture. Zach was given a camera he didn't know how to use, and once again, he jumped into a job he was less than qualified to do. Through stubborn trial and error, he figured out this new medium, which evolved into other opportunities. He continued to be involved in the project, eventually getting to do additional film work. After the shooting of the movie, Zach and his friend who ran the Kickstarter campaign started a film production company called Rhetoric. For years, they partnered together on commercials, music videos, and other multimedia projects before finally parting ways and forming separate companies. The last time I spoke to Zach, he was finishing up a 30 for 30 ESPN documentary on the tragic but heroic death of NFL star Joe Delaney. Now he is an in-demand film editor. I asked Zach if he wondered what would have happened had he gone to bed that night instead of getting up, going to his friend's house, and sending that email. Would he have still gotten the gig? Absolutely not, he told me. That was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and we both knew it. We are told artists are stubborn, and they certainly can be. But this isn't always a bad thing. Stubbornness can be an essential ingredient in making a living off your art. When you harness your strategic stubbornness, you give the world a reason to believe in your work. When to quit. Michelangelo was 30 years old when he began working on a tomb for Pope Julius II in February 1505. 3 stories tall, with 40 life-size figures and other ornaments, it was going to be a sight to behold. The artist's dreams for the piece were so grandiose that he confessed there was a madness that came over me. But when the Pope began to lose interest in the project, Michelangelo grew angry. Unable to get the Pope's attention for a couple of months in 1506, he fled Rome without the Pope's permission. This did not please the papacy, and Michelangelo, who was now an outlaw, had to take refuge under the Florentine governor's protection. Pope Julius summoned the defiant artist, and the two worked out their disagreements, agreeing to continue the project. The artist apologized to the Pope and sculpted a statue of him, likely as a form of penance. At the heart of Michelangelo's sudden departure was a demand for respect, one of the first times in history that an artist set the terms of his work. Michelangelo and Julius were redefining the relations between artist and patron, wrote historian William Wallace. Michelangelo's correspondence in 1506 and 1507 reads like that of a tired and overburdened artist. I live in great discomfort and fatigue, he wrote to his brother in November 1507. I do little other than work day and night, and it has been a hard and difficult labor. The difference between Michelangelo and F. Scott Fitzgerald is that he didn't end his letter there. Instead, he summoned his stubbornness, channeled it into grit, and concluded, "It is enough that I have brought it to completion." In the spring of 1508, Julius reassigned Michelangelo from the tomb to the painting of the Sistine Chapel ceiling. That might have been the end of the tomb, but refusing again to give up, Michelangelo scaled the tomb's design down to a more manageable size and returned to it repeatedly until it was completed in 1545, 40 years after he had started. He could have walked away a dozen times, but he didn't. That's the grit of a real artist. Michelangelo might have been difficult to work with. He might even have defied popes and other powerful patrons, but he was stubborn as a donkey, and that's why he completed so many great works. Stubbornness was a tool he learned to use for the benefit of his art. We are used to thinking of stubbornness as something to be avoided. It often takes the shape of impulsive behavior or of not filtering our own thoughts. Then later we are forced to face the consequences of our actions. But it can also be crucial to the success of an artist. Steve Jobs' reality distortion field is a notable example of this. As demonstrated by a story from Andy Herzfeld, who had just joined the Apple team in 1981. Andy recalls arguing with coworker Bud Tribble on the deadline to release the original Macintosh software in 10 months. That's impossible, Andy said, knowing how many details had to fall exactly in line. But such things hardly mattered to the stubborn CEO. In Jobs' presence, reality is malleable, Bud told Andy. He can convince anyone of practically anything. It wears off when he's not around, but it makes it hard to have realistic schedules. One kind of stubbornness can push a person away and lead to their demise, as was the case with Fitzgerald's inability to persevere in getting lost in the failure of his work. Michelangelo, on the other hand, learned to channel his stubbornness into grit, so that even though the Julius tomb was initially canceled, he continued reviving the project for the rest of his life, eventually completing it at the age of 70. Most people tend to make us Most people tend to make use of only a small amount of their resources, whereas, to quote Angela Duckworth, a few exceptional individuals push themselves to their limits. This is grit in action, and the effect is the heightened level of focus and intensity on the work. What makes you stubborn in one area of life can make you successful in another if you learn to harness the ability. For many years, Michelangelo's stubbornness was a liability, but as he matured, it became an asset, something he used for the benefit of his work instead of his ego. Stubbornness gets in the way when it's about you, your fame, your reputation, your success, but it becomes a tool when used to further your work. Stubborn enough to succeed. Starting in February 1943, 3 years after F. Scott Fitzgerald's death, the Council on Books in Wartime capitalized on the innovation of paperback printing and sent 150,000 copies of The Great Gatsby to soldiers overseas. After being circulated during World War II, the novel became popular as many soldiers returned home with the story imprinted on their minds. In the 1950s, due in part to its brevity, Gatsby was introduced to high school English curriculums, causing even wider success. By 1960, the book was selling 50,000 copies per year, a trend that continues today and has only been boosted by the appearance and reappearance of the story on movie screens. To date, the novel has sold more than 25 million copies. Ironically, Fitzgerald's book endured even when he did not. But what might have happened to the author if he hadn't given up so soon? What if he'd had more grit, been a little more tenacious, and harnessed his stubbornness? Had he endured just a few more years, he may very well have seen Gatsby become the bestseller it is today. And what other works might he have given us if he'd found a way to turn his stubbornness into tenacity? Sometimes, when we see a creative person succeed, we dismiss his breakthrough as luck or the result of pure talent, but neither explanation is accurate. What often allows great work to get the attention it deserves is not a matter of only talent or luck, but a matter of the will. Can you stick around long enough to see your work succeed? Do you have enough grit to take a few critical hits and keep going? Or will you get discouraged at the first sign of failure? Zach Picard had no experience running a crowdfunding campaign, much less doing media work. But what he did have was stubbornness, and he could figure out the rest. The result was the largest crowdfunding campaign Kickstarter had ever seen. How many other people would have stayed up all night on a whim to earn just the chance to fundraise for a project that had little hope of succeeding? Let's not forget, Zach wasn't getting paid to do any of this. It was a volunteer opportunity that would take up his nights and weekends for months while he still had to hold down a day job. Fortunately, he had the tenacity to not only start such an endeavor, but to see it through. He had the vision and wasn't distracted by the details, so when he saw his chance to succeed, he took it. But let's not misinterpret what happened here. Talent did not do this. Tenacity did. If you want to see your work succeed, you must be stubborn. You must be willing to keep going, even in the face of adversity. On the surface, stubbornness may look like a liability, but in creative work, it can be an asset. A little tenacity can fuel our pursuit of excellence, giving us the grit we need to create lasting work. We must be wary, however, to not let our need for greatness hijack the work itself. Flexible on details, but stubborn on vision, as Jeff Bezos would say. Yes, this work takes some stubbornness, but that should be nothing new for an artist. The question is, are you stubborn enough to succeed? And that concludes chapter 4 of Real Artists Don't Starve. Timeless Strategies for Thriving in the New Creative Age by Jeff Goins. I'm going to put a link at some point. I'm going to put a link in my bio for you to be able to purchase the books that I read. I'm going to make a list, and so you can get it, whether it's on Kindle or the hardback, on Amazon, so that you can download it, and so that you can read it at your own leisure as well. I'm really enjoying this book so far. We're getting ready to embark into part 2. There are 3 parts of the book, but today's chapter I think is really challenging for me, really encouraging too, because as a creative person, I know I've personally wrestled with that, having that grit and that grind and that tenacity, for various reasons. And I mean, I think the biggest reason usually oftentimes is finances. As the title says, real artists don't starve. But for a lot of artists, they do. They starve, or they struggle, or they have to have multiple jobs to continue to pursue their passion, or the thing that they're gifted in, or the thing that they want to do, which can be challenging. And it also doesn't help when you have maybe people close to you that mean well, but sometimes can criticize the things that you're doing, and that can put a damper on what you're trying to do. And I know that's something that I struggled with and wrestled with, and it's something that I'm trying to reclaim. Trying to refine, relocate, I should say, or find again that creative spark or the creative version of myself, that I feel like, because of adulting and because of life and other things and depression, low self-esteem and stuff like that, I lost a lot of that stuff. I don't think I was at the point of F. Scott Fitzgerald, but I would say I feel like I've had similarities to that. Having a season of life. I would say for me it was in college, a season of life of creating and doing a lot of stuff and feeling successful to some degree. But then when you leave college, I think it may be the case for a lot of people who graduated or who have graduated from college. Once you leave college, where you are in this incubating space, you kind of get smacked in the face with the real world and real responsibilities and stuff like that. And it can be challenging to continue to hold on to your ambitions, to hold on to your vision, because at times that vision can be replaced with realism, or what's considered realistic, or what's considered responsible, which isn't really good for an artist, which really isn't good for a creative. And to be honest, I don't think it's really good for anybody. Not to say that you shouldn't use wisdom. I think there's a difference between wisdom and being realistic. The reason I say that is because I believe God, Heavenly Father, the Most High, the Creator of all things. Even the Scripture says, wisdom. He used wisdom to create the world. But also in Scripture, it talks about the spiritual realm, the realm that we don't see, is more real than what we feel or what we see in this existence. This ain't even the real thing. But we get so caught up, and I think that might be a tool of the enemy. I'm kind of ranting right now, guys, so sorry. But I think that's a tool of the enemy to keep us from fulfilling the life that we're supposed to live, and to take away that tenacity, to take away that grit that we're supposed to have, to live out our lives, to live for God's glory and for the good of other people. Because when you think realistically, you put all these limits on yourself. You put all these limits on the Most High Himself. And sure, there are certain limitations. There's with that wisdom, there are things that are established, like gravity. You can't just start floating unless you know something that I don't know. You need to eat food. And, there's certain things that work in this world in the way God created it. But that doesn't mean you have to limit yourself. Like if God gives you a vision or a dream or desire to accomplish something that may not seem quote unquote realistic in the moment, that faith that He's giving you is supposed to also, that faith and that grace that He's giving you is supposed to help you to be tenacious, to give you the tenacity, to pursue it. Because think about Noah. Like I was just watching a sermon the other day. He talked about that, but like, think about it. When Noah started building the ark, one, it took him a long time. I think sometimes we look at movies or we look at the like the little kid Bible stories or whatever. We look at those and we think, oh yeah, they kind of just built that joint like in a weekend. No, it took like over 100 years for Noah and his family to build that ark. And imagine that, like you're amongst these people, other human beings, other people that you live around, and they're watching you build this big boxy boat that supposedly God told you to build, and it's supposed to be for the coming rainstorm. So you're building a boat to survive a rainstorm. You're doing this for over 100 years. And in those 100 years, and even before that, it's never rained. So realistically, what's the point of building a boat? Realistically, what are you doing? But the Most High gave Noah a call and a command and a vision. And along with that, grace and tenacity and fortitude to be obedient to accomplish that thing. And it wasn't, quote unquote, realistic at the time, because nobody had a need for that. What rainstorm? What are you talking about? It hasn't rained. And that's the thing, like, when people have visions and dreams, whether they are artists or just creatives or entrepreneurs or whatever, when we're trying to be realistic, whether that's out of spite, whether that's out of good intention, sometimes family members will say, oh, you can't do that, you shouldn't do that, or being an artist, you're going to end up starving. Like, all of those things are good intentioned, but you're being realistic can be good intention, but you're actually putting a cap, or what's the other term that I heard recently? A governor, like in cars. Certain cars are made and they put governors on them so they can't go as fast as they're supposed to. So, whenever you're in your car and like you're in a car and it says like 240 miles an hour, but you can never get up there because, if you're getting a car and you haven't done any work to it, it's got a governor on it. So it's not going to be able to go that fast. But that's what you're doing. Being realistic, we're stifling people's ability to be all of who God has created them to be. And so that chapter in the book really resonates with me because it's something I desire to get back, and desire to, work out and develop in my own life, to be tenacious, especially pursuing the things that really matter to me, and to pursue those things that I believe the Most High has placed in my heart to seek, and the visions that He's given me. Because I think it's important. I think that we have to fight. We have to be tenacious. We have to have that tenacity. We have to keep going. And sometimes that means not being realistic. That means stepping out on faith. That means using wisdom and trusting in God and His grace and mercy more than what you see in front of you. I think scriptures also say, we walk by faith and not by sight. Well, sometimes faith isn't realistic. So I think I'm ending my rant. But like we have to reclaim that if you're an artist, if you're creative, if you're a business owner, if you're an entrepreneur, like hold on to, as the author was sharing, like access and utilize that stubbornness that you have. Does that mean be a jerk to people? Probably not. You don't have to be a jerk to people. But use that stubbornness, use that tenacity, use that grit to help you accomplish the thing that you see, that vision. And don't feel bound by realism or being realistic. Because sometimes what's real ain't even that good. But anyways, thanks for watching, listening. For those who go back and watch this and make it to the end with a rant, thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for the likes. Thanks for those who have tuned in. Sorry the lighting is kind of wonky. The sun is setting behind me. But hopefully you can hear me. I will try to be back tomorrow, maybe in the morning. We'll see. I will be back tomorrow to continue the book. We're close to halfway there. Hopefully you all are enjoying this. Hopefully you're getting nuggets from this book that works for you and that is encouraging to you. If you're an artist, if you're a creative, if you're an entrepreneur, I think there's a lot of overlap with creative work and entrepreneurial work. If you're being an entrepreneur or just life in general, if you're trying to just accomplish something different, if you're trying to make your vision come to life, make your dreams come true and all that. But y'all stay safe, and I'll catch you on the next one.